I keep waiting for the betrayal too far, that action by the state against Britain that finally pushes every last citizen of the country that used to be Britain into the grim realisation that those illegitimates are out to get us. The green agenda that guarantees the impoverishment of the peoples of the West by pursuing the lie that wind and solar can take the place of gas, oil and coal. The green agenda that pushes the palpable nonsense those of us with petrol and diesel cars today are meant to have electric cars tomorrow, when all the evidence makes plain that you and I are meant to be going nowhere, while our self-appointed masters go anywhere and everywhere. The green agenda that invites us to think that net zero and the rest are about anything more than stealing our rights and freedoms while further enriching the already rich. The delegates for COP27 flying in private jets to luxury accommodation in Egypt, where they sat down to meals of £100 a time cuts of prime Aberdeen Angus beef, foie gras, which is the liver of force-fed geese, salmon and sea bass and cream sauces, while pausing between burps to lecture us proles about carbon emissions and the need to eat bugs and genetically modified grass. Those delegates discussing plans to eviscerate the farming industry, to cut farming around the world by anything up to a half in a time of food insecurity for millions. The blindingly obvious realisation that these schemes are nothing to do with saving the planet, but merely the means to bankrupt the farmers and drive them off the land so it may be acquired by transnational corporations. The realisation that governments and physicians together oversaw the most disastrous medical intervention in history, that by setting aside first do no harm and informed consent and opting instead for ruinous lockdowns and coercion, they took a bad situation and made it much worse. The revelation that those so-called vaccines were never even tested to see if they would stop transmission of COVID, which they absolutely did not do, thereby revealing that all the government and media-driven propaganda demanding submission to the needle to save granny was a blatant lie. The revelation that those medical products do not stop a person contracting any virus. The realisation, quite simply expressed, that those medical products making billions for Big Pharma do not work as advertised. Would it be the soaring numbers of people dying from causes unrelated to COVID, the people dying or suffering life-altering consequences in the aftermath of submitting to the jabs, released only under the terms of emergency use authorisation, the number of otherwise healthy people, young people included, dropping dead or being found dead in their beds? Would it be the fact it's still all but forbidden to ask if the so-called vaccines have anything to do with those excess deaths? Or the realisation that all the currencies in the world, the pound, the dollar, the euro, are now nothing more than Ponzi schemes, fraudulent confidence tricks doomed ultimately to collapse, and soon, and that ought to have put their operators in jail long ago. The news from the US that another Ponzi scheme called FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange owned and operated by a 30-year-old wunderkind, has crashed, taking billions of dollars into oblivion. Tens of billions of US dollars were sent by the Biden administration to Ukraine. Ukraine invested some of that in FTX. Then FTX donated $40 million to the Democrat campaign for the midterms. At what point does it become legitimate to ask if this was profiteering or money laundering? Now the collapse of FTX could potentially be seized upon by Biden's administration as the excuse they were waiting for to pass legislation to take control of cryptocurrencies. Killing two birds with one stone, anyone? What about the knowledge that college dropout computer software salesman Bill Gates has acquired more than 250,000 acres of farmland in the US for purposes unknown? Or the daily and nightly arrival by dinghies of tens of thousands of young men on Britain's southern shore, where they're ferried to hotels for free accommodation, free money, free food and access to all the GP and dental appointments you can't get, all of it at the taxpayer's expense. The knowledge that their arrival is aided and abetted by Serco, a company whose outgoing chief executive is Rupert Soames, grandson of Winston Churchill, the wartime leader made immortal by his vow to defend the beaches. Oh, the irony. Or the fact that Serco has the contract for finding accommodation for those migrants, that profits hugely by offering millions a time to hoteliers to sack their staff and turn their properties into hostels for those young men, always young men. The realisation, in my eyes anyway, is that the British born and raised here have been put at the back of the queue for everything their taxes pay for, so that all of those benefits can be extended to new arrivals. The realisation that the powers that be are intent on breaking the morale and spirit of the British, transforming us into a compliant, dependent, unquestioning herd, ready to accept whatever indignity might be foisted upon us next. The threat of nuclear war, dear God, the existential threat we all grew up fearing in the last third of the 20th century. The climax we're being invited to accept as somehow inevitable, the very existence of every man, woman and child apparently hanging in the balance amidst all the politics as the fighting drags on month after month. And then, as if all of that wasn't enough, look at the politics here. Last week came the financial statement from Hunt, the Chancellor no one wanted except the markets that make our country's decisions for us. I listened to as much of his rubbish as I could before I felt the gorge rise in my throat. Surely I thought this litany of contempt, nudge unit grooming, obfuscation and downright patronising piffle would awaken the slumbering, sleepwalking masses to the now undeniable, unmissable fact that those occupying the great offices of state are working around the clock to break Britain and the British. No help for the workers, no help for pubs and restaurants, no help and only more hurt for small businesses of all sorts. No help for those who generate the modest profits upon which everything in our society depends. Those who received no furlough, not a cent, are to reach into empty pockets and pay for those that did. This is the equivalent of throwing a dinner party, inviting some to enjoy all they can eat, and then insisting that those who watched from outside the restaurant, hungry while they pressed their noses against the glass, should now help foot the bill for food they didn't eat. This all on its own is a graceless, egregious scandal. So-called bounce-back loans are being reclaimed from bank accounts of those that received them. But furlough? No, that money went out and won't be coming back. And the same self-employed the government hates are being ordered to pick up the tab. Listen to some of what Hunt said, if you have the stomach for it.
We also protect the vulnerable, because to be British is to be compassionate, and this is a compassionate Conservative government.
He goes on. The Bank of England, which has done an outstanding job since its independence, now has my wholehearted support in its mission to defeat inflation, and I today confirm we will not change its remit. And then try swallowing this vomit-inducing cant from Hunt. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I have talked a lot today about British values of compassion, hard work, dignity, fairness. There is no more British value than our commitment to protect and honour those who built the country we live in. But the British people are tough, inventive and resourceful. We have risen to bigger challenges before. We aren't immune to these headwinds, but with this plan for stability, growth and public services, we will face into the storm. End of quote. How that man has the gall to pronounce such disingenuous platitudes in public at such a time when millions are on their knees is beyond me. Him and his parliamentary colleagues are the people who put us here with policies they kept pushing long after anyone with half a brain could see the disaster coming. The Conservative Party has become what the Labour Party has been for generations, the enemy of those who would work all the hours to make something of themselves, something they might raise up their children with and set them on the same aspirational road. Governments of every stripe hate and loathe the self-employed, the entrepreneurs, because by definition those sovereign individuals do not need the state. What those people need is for the state to get out of their way, and this latest iteration of the state refuses to do that. On the contrary, they seek only to break the middling classes and have them ask for help instead. What will it take, I ask, before the rest of this country awakens to the realisation that we are being had, being played and taken for fools? What will it take before those citizens see that we have put ourselves at the mercy of a criminal enterprise shaped only to rob us blind, hobble all ambition and see to it that we are cowed and submissive with our hands held out for a few shekels from our self-proclaimed lords and masters? Here's the thing. All of it stops when we say it stops. It doesn't require every one of us, just enough of us, simply to realise that no cavalry is coming, no help is at hand. It's up to us to see these charlatans for what they are, to disregard them, red, blue and every colour in between, to turn our backs on them and work together to make something else, something decent, something that is ours.